clear Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion, which we're about to look at in a way that very few people have ever seen in your audience. I've had to travel the world to bring these artifacts to your program. Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion is the best established fact of the ancient world. If we cannot believe that Jesus died by Roman crucifixion, the only thing on par with that, historically speaking, are the Roman emperors themselves. Let that sink in. And I mean on par with that by the sources that we have for Jesus'
Okay,
death.
so then what are the sources? Because I'll hear this.
Oh, yeah.
I'll hear things like, I remember before I was totally convinced, you'd hear things like, there were 500 eyewitnesses to the resurrection, which is now something that I say. But, what's the evidence?
Right. The evidence is the letter written to the Corinthians by Saul of Tarsus that no serious scholar doubts that Paul wrote it. I've been to Corinth, where literally the church of Corinth was that Paul's writing to. It's written in the early AD 50s. That tradition, though, rises up within 6 weeks of the resurrection event itself, which is 20 years prior. You have 11 sources that talk of Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion within a historically plausible, acceptable timeline of 100 years.
And that's just special that you are able to use the Bible to verify the fact that you believe Jesus was crucified by crucifixion. Well, yeah, that's what crucified means. But to use the letter written by Paul to the Church of Corinth to suggest that, because most scholars will agree that the letters are written by someone named Paul, not even exactly sure, but there's no proof that Paul actually existed besides from these letters. But the fact that Paul writes about how somebody told him about how people told them that these 500 people saw Jesus, that would not hold up in court. That would not hold up in any other system of credibility, because this is hearsay to the third person. So therefore, that's not evidence. And the Bible cannot be evidence in of itself. So to suggest that there are other evidence of Jesus being crucified would only be if you had these sources from contemporaries at that time frame. You see, Tacitus writing about what people believe is not credible source. That's what people believe. Pliny the Younger writing about what people believe, that's not a source. Suetonius writing about what people believe, not a credible source. Credible sources cannot be when people are writing based on what people believe, and these stories have come secondhand, third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand over the course of 100 years. That is not credibility. These people must have a credible source that speaks of it during the time frame that it supposedly happened, and then those historians are repeating the information based on the credibility of people who were there. So let's say if these 500 people had wrote, or if 25 of them who were literate, because let's say 25% of the 25%, 25 of the 500 are literate, and then those 25 wrote what they saw at that time frame in and around 27 to 33 CE. And then Paul is writing based on what those people wrote that has went under the scrutiny of other people at that time frame saying, yes, that is what they saw. Then you have a bit more credibility. But when Paul is writing it 50, 60 years later about what people are claiming that they saw because somebody else heard about it, because somebody else heard about it from them, that's not credible sources. And neither is the actual existence of Paul, neither is the actual existence of Jesus. And you see, first you have to prove that Paul existed. There's absolutely nothing that actually proves that Paul existed. We have 6 or 7 letters that are written by an author. That author seems to be the same person. That author might even be whom we call Paul of Tarsus. But we have no other proof. We don't have any types of, they didn't do birth certificates, but we don't have any type of birth statements. We don't have his family lineage to prove that they existed. We have nothing that shows that he was a Pharisee. We have nothing that shows that he was in Roman records that show that this person named Paul was held for sedition or whatnot and was persecuted himself, killed himself, jailed himself. We have nothing that shows that Paul interacted with government officials that would put him in a situation where he would have been recorded. And according to the story, Paul was in jail. According to the story, Paul was killed. There's nothing that demonstrates any of that information. Therefore, Paul could be anyone, which then takes away the authority, especially the story of Paul being knocked off his horse is not even a story that Paul tells, but is a story that is told by the author of Acts, which many believe is Luke, but the author of Acts, who is telling the story of another man getting knocked off his horse, telling pretty much the Bacchae story, a very, very popular Greek story that was created, I believe, in the 3rd century BCE or either the 3rd or the 6th century BCE and lived for centuries. One of the most world famous plays, lived for centuries. It's like Hamilton, right? Or the Moulin Rouge. How about that? Moulin Rouge. So there's still no credibility. There's still no credibility to Paul's actual existence outside of the Bible. So therefore, it's a grain of salt. But you have to be able to prove Paul, his existence, before we can even get started with what he claimed. Now, as far as other things that are credible, yes, emperors are easier to give credibility towards because there's documentation that is written at the time frame. There's laws that they enact. There's coins that are minted with their face on it. There's all these other types of pottery and things of that nature that would demonstrate. And there's empires that they conquered. There's war machines that they ran. So we have a lot more credibility when it comes to leaders, yes, but even people who weren't leaders, we still would have certain levels of credibility. We have Roman records of Josephus. We have Roman records of Pilate. So we can say that Josephus existed. Although he was born in 34, he is not an eyewitness to any Jesus account, and the testimony of Flavianus is known to be a forgery. We have proof. We can believe that Pilate existed. We have Roman records that demonstrate that he was a governor over Judea. But what we don't have is any proof that this governor of Judea presided over the death of this Yeshua who was crucified. None. The Pilate letters have been shown to be a forgery. So therefore, we have nothing from Pilate himself accounting for the death of Jesus, the Yeshua character. Zero, zilch. He is not in any Roman records whatsoever. And since Rome was the ruling government over Judea at that time frame, if there were any records, it would be by the Romans. And the Romans kept phenomenal records, but we have none. What we have is belief, and what we have is hearsay, which neither of those things are proof. It is not. So he traveled all over the world, which means nothing. I've traveled all over the world as well. And I've seen a bunch of things. But what I look for is archaeology that proves what was and what happened. And then you have to scrutinize some of the ancient archaeology, because if Helena claimed that this is where the cross was, well, she's the mother of the emperor 300 years after the so-called events happened. Who's questioning that? If she claims that she has the true cross, she's the mother of the emperor, of Constantine. Who's going to challenge her of that in a time frame when you will be beheaded by challenging the queen mother? So no, we have none. None, no proof whatsoever of Jesus, of Paul, of the resurrection. So the story is completely invalid. It is based on belief and faith, which is whether you, if that is to believe something with no facts or to believe something in the face of facts, which creates confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. This is why we free ourselves to be ourselves, because our greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.